The Snow Queen by Joan D. Vinge, published in 1980, won the Hugo Award for Best Novel in 1981. I've got this trade paperback edition here with some incredible artwork by Michael Whelan. And this has a reader's guide included, which includes a glossary of terms, an interview with Joan Vinge, and some book club discussion prompts at the back as well. I've also got this edition of the book as well, with some cover art that I'm less fond of, and this one is obviously a much smaller copy, but you can see that this is quite a long science fiction book. The Snow Queen is set on the cold oceanic planet Tiamat, which is in a binary star system. And every time the planet switches orbit between these stars every 150 years, there is a change in leadership on the planet, shifting the control between the two key groups of people, the summer people and the winter people, referred to as the summers and the winters. The winters welcome off-worlders from other planets and they embrace the technology that they bring, whereas the summers are a much more pastoral people who reject technology and live in these fishing villages on this chain of islands. Where the winters have a much greater focus on science and technology, the summers worship a goddess of the ocean. The winters are primarily living in the main city on the planet Tiamat, which is this single structure set on the coast of the largest continent. And this single structure is this enormous spiraling city which extends up into the sky, with the class system being elevated from scoundrels and criminals at the lower levels all the way to the palace at the top of the spiral, which is where the titular Snow Queen resides. The Snow Queen is the sole monarch and ruler of Tiamat while the winters are in control. During the period where the summers are in control, there is a summer queen. Joan Vinge cites Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale story of the same name as the key inspiration for this novel, and you can definitely feel that in a number of ways. One of those ways is the presence of the mers, these native sea-dwelling creatures whose blood contains a substance which can massively extend human life, referred to as the water of life. So there are really clear other inspirations, which I'll get into a bit later on, but just from that, it should be fairly obvious what they are. So the winters hunt these mers, these sea-dwelling creatures, to capture them, kill them, and extract the water of life from their blood, and they trade this extremely valuable substance with the off-worlders who covet it, and they use it to extend their own life as well. These off-worlders visit the planet Tiamat through something known as the Black Gate, which is this orbiting black hole, which is used to access the solar system from the distant stars, from this league of 7 other populated planets referred to as the hegemony. Although in this book, I think it's actually pronounced hegemony because they refer to these off-worlders as hedgies. This hegemony won't allow the planet of Tiamat to join their ranks because every 150 years, when the summers take power, they reject all of the technology that the off-worlders have brought and they cast it into the ocean, which effectively resets their technological development and prevents them from becoming advanced enough to the point that the hegemony will accept them. All of this is set up, by the way, so I'm not really going to get into spoilers in this review, but this is where the titular Snow Queen comes into play, because she is extremely frustrated with this constant cycle that Tiamat is going through. And she herself is taking the water of life to extend her own lifespan up to the point where she is nearing 150 years old. And she does not want to give up her power and she wants to retain control of the planet Tiamat for the winters, with the goal of breaking this change cycle and gaining entry into the hegemony for the planet and its people. The way that she goes about this, and this again is right at the beginning of the book, it's not a spoiler, she seeds these clones of herself throughout the world, hoping that they will come into power and continue her reign. Although all of these 9, I think it is, clones die in childbirth or do not make it to adulthood, except from one, a young girl who is living on the island nations of the Summers called Moon. Moon is one of the 2 key main characters alongside her cousin Sparks, who's actually also her lover. Moon is determined to become a Sibyl, which are these kind of sage-like oracle people who the Summers think are tapping into communications with the goddess of the sea. And through that, they gain access to a deep well of knowledge, and people ask these Sibyls questions which they can then answer. These Sibyls are also used to facilitate space travel through the Black Gate to the other solar systems. So here's where I'll mention the elephant in the room, what I think is the biggest inspiration for the Snow Queen. And just to sum up, we've got a creature native to this planet whose blood contains an immortality-inducing substance referred to as the water of life. You have these humans whose minds function like computers, allowing them to facilitate and navigate space travel. And you've got this very political, conspiratorial plotline. So it's very clear to me that Vinge was inspired by Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune, in a way that does feel derivative at times, and I think that comparison gets thrown around a lot in science fiction to the point that it becomes tiresome and at times unwarranted, but I do think that it is incredibly evident and appropriate to make that comparison here. The other thing I think that the book feels like more than takes direct inspiration from is Star Wars, particularly because of some of the characters being smugglers and this general sort of swashbuckling tone that you get alongside those parts of the book. So there are tons of characters, locations, themes, plots and subplots. There's a lot here, and I think that Vinge, for the most part, is doing it all fairly well. The first 300 pages or so was kind of like ice skating. I was breezing through it, taking in this world, these characters and these stories. But for the last 100 to 150 pages, I feel like I hit a snowbank and I was just wading through it, and it felt like a slog to get this one finished. Joan D. Vinge's former husband was the fellow science fiction writer Vernor Vinge, and his epic space opera featured in my top 10 science fiction books I've ever read video, and that is A Fire Upon the Deep, which I also have this trade paperback copy of. And in a similar way, Vernor Vinge does a lot here. One of the things I praised this book for was that it features all of these characters, these themes, these stories, and it's all brought together masterfully. And I think Joan Vinge is doing a similar thing. I don't think she's doing it quite as well, but I would probably say that her characters are better and more distinctive than the ones in A Fire Upon the Deep. So I enjoyed The Snow Queen, but in the end I do feel like it has major pacing issues that let it down, and it does feel a bit derivative of Dune at times. But outside of that, if you want to sink into a fairly long science fiction story with all of these different elements and just kind of enjoy that world building, I think The Snow Queen could be for you. Now, The Snow Queen is the first book in a 4-book series, which I do own. So The Snow Queen is followed up by a book called World's End, which I have this really amazing copy of with quite different cover art, but it's still extremely cool. And it has these bronze embossed details on it that I just think work incredibly well. This is a much shorter book. I've got another copy of this actually, another edition, which has these strange gargoyle-like winged creatures on the cover, and then that book is followed up by The Summer Queen, which again has a really incredible cover illustration by Michael Whelan, which features the Summer Queen that I mentioned earlier from When the Summers Are in Power. This is an even bigger book than The Snow Queen. Extremely long and intimidating. And then the series is finished up with Tangled Up in Blue, which has some cover art there that I think is a little bit more 90s in fashion and feels a little bit like cyberpunk to me in terms of the aesthetic. But that is the final book in the 4-book Snow Queen cycle. Have you read The Snow Queen by Joan D. Vinge? Have you read the entire series? If you have, please let me know your thoughts, whether I should continue on or stop with the first book. Have you read any of Vernor Vinge's work, including A Fire Upon the Deep? Let me know if you feel like the comparison was suitable there. And that's all for today, so thank you very much for watching, liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one.